This podcast is a quest for well-being, a quest for a meaningful life through the exploration of fundamental truth. Enlightening ideas, insights on physical, mental, and spiritual health. The inspiration is love. The aspiration is to awaken new ways of thinking that can lead us to a new way of being well. Welcome to Body, Mind, and Soul Healing Conversations.
Burnout is not a new phenomenon, but it's a growing one. Valeria Teles interviews Suzi McAlpine, the author of Beyond Burnout, a New Zealand guide, how to spot it, stop it, and stamp it out. Suzi specializes in leadership development, including executive coaching, leadership workshops, and programs for CEOs, leadership teams, and organizations throughout New Zealand. An experienced author and mentor, Suzi writes and teaches about accomplished leadership, what magic emerges when it's present, and how to inspire and improve leadership in individuals, teams, and organizations. Suzi has been a leader and senior executive herself, working alongside CEOs and executive teams in many guises. As a self-renowned leadership geek, Suzi's years of experience includes being an executive search consultant, associate director, executive coach, and a practice leader for a division of the world's largest HR consulting firm. Award-winning blog, The Leader's Digest, has been named in CMOE's Top 100 Socially Shared Leadership Blogs, Serve to Lead's Best 21st Century Leadership Blogs, Charles Specht's Top 50 Global Leadership Bloggers, HubWorks Global Top 25 Leadership and Management Blogs, and MP Star Financial's Global Top 25 International Leadership Blogs for Small Business. Most recently, Suzi launched the Leader's Map. The blended online leadership platform provides organizations wishing to equip their emerging leaders with the necessary leadership capabilities for success. Based in Nelson, New Zealand, Suzi lives with her husband and 3 children. Meet Suzi at SuziMcAlpine.com. Here is the interview with Suzi McAlpine.
In your own words, who is Suzi McAlpine?
I love that question, and it's quite a difficult one for me to answer. Who is Suzi McAlpine, being inside Suzi McAlpine? But it would really depend on which day or which moment that you ask me that question. If you were to take a professional lens, I am a leadership geek. I geek out on anything to do with leadership, and I'm really fortunate because my job, what I do for a living, enables me to really geek out on that, whether that's being a leadership coach, writing about leadership, talking about leadership, learning about leadership, working as an executive coach. But that's only one dimension of me. I love art. I love music. I'm terrible at sports, much to the joy of my family. They like to really take the mickey out of me on that. I'm a mother of 3. My eldest son is 20, off at university, and I have a 16-year-old son and a 12-year-old daughter, and a wonderful husband of 21 years and a cat. So that kind of sums it up, I think, in a few minutes.
So I often ask some of the guests that I interview about leadership, about the true meaning of leadership to them. So I'll ask you the same question to you.
I think leadership is really about lifting other people up. It is about, in some ways, it's not about yourself, although I think the best leaders I've ever worked with had great self-awareness. But the focus is really about lifting others up, about taking places where they want to go and need to go. It is about helping others. And I think it is about helping others reach their full potential. And I think actually at its centre, it's about love, really. I think the best leaders that I have ever worked with or spoken with have been heart-centred. It really is about love, which may not suit, the business context, but that is really what I think it is about.
I do ask the question a lot about what's the purpose of life to a lot of my guests, and that comes to as an answer all the time. Love, help others.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, that connection now, leadership, being a leader, and serving that purpose of life. That's an interesting connection that I've seen.
Isn't it interesting that comes up again and again for you? And I used to be really reticent about using the word love when, particularly in corporate environments, I work with senior leadership teams, but the more I do this work and the more, I guess, the older I get, the more happy I am to use that. And interestingly, I think it resonates, whether you use that word compassion, heart-centered leadership, whatever language you use, you can feel it when it's present in a room, when a leader is leading well, when you see encounters between leaders and, the people, their direct reports, if it's in an organisational perspective. So, yeah, I think that's a great way to talk about it.
That's the thing. I don't really separate business or what we do to make money from who we are. Everything is an extension, right, of who we are. It's not separate. Some people, they tend to separate, but I don't.
I love that philosophy because we can't compartmentalize parts of ourselves. And the interesting thing is the more that I bring that sense of love into my work, whether that was writing my book or in working with teams or individuals, the better the outcomes, so yeah.
So how do you define mental wellness, Suzi? What is that for you from your perspective?
I think if there was a word to describe it, it is thriving. I don't like to use the word necessarily happiness because I think you can be fulfilled and thriving. Happiness can be fleeting, but it's a sense of a holistic wellness. It is a sense of thriving and being able to meet whatever challenges that life throws at us. And there have been times when I have felt very mentally well, and there have been other times in my life where I haven't felt like that. And when I have felt mentally well, I've felt more grounded and more stronger, but also softer at the same time. It feels like you can meet life in a better way.
Yeah. What do you feel is the main component for mental wellness? Would you say resilience, inner peace, self-love?
That's a really good question. I would say that the most important thing is resilience. I have a slight allergic reaction to the word resilience because I think it's used as a weapon in many ways in many organisations and cultures. It's, if we can just give people resilience courses. But for me, I turn to nature. If you look at nature and you look at a tree, and its roots are deep, and if it is, the wind, moves it bends, it doesn't break, and so I think it's if we turn to nature, I think that's when we often get the best metaphors, really, for mental wellness. For me, it's really interesting when I think about the times in my life or when I've been working with other leaders about being and they've had mental wellness. They've had a very strong sense of their purpose, of their values, and they're living by those every day. I believe there's a really strong sense of knowing what your values are and living those every single day in little ways. And when I've done that and I've practiced that, I've been more mentally well.
It's an important message for all of us to know and to be reminded of. Not compromising our values. Sometimes we tend to do that. In my case, it has been a challenge. I think you call it saying no or boundaries, setting boundaries. That's a big one. That's a tough one.
It so is, and it really resonates for me. I'm getting much better at that, but for a lot of my life, I've been a people pleaser. And in fact, I think one of the causes of my burnout, there were many, but it was that inability to set boundaries, to say no, to take on more than I really wanted to or needed to. These days, I'm getting much better. I can't remember the author, but if it's not a hell yeah, it's a no, and I'm learning to do that. The other thing that I think has been really useful when to consider when you talk about boundaries is having more space in my life, probably more than I think that I need. And it's often in those spaces where where creativity comes through, when I've done my best writing, and wonderful things have happened, is when I have space. But it's a challenge, right? I can totally get that.
What is success for you today? How do you define success?
I think success for me has changed quite a bit over the years. I think in my 20s and 30s, I really chased shiny badges of external success, climbing the corporate ladder, having, a high-paying role with titles and power. I cringe sometimes when I look back at my younger self, but try and be compassionate. These days, success for me is really simple. It is about what I bring out into the world. If I feel that I can go to bed at night and say I ignited better leadership in some shape or form in others and in myself, that is success. Balance is really important to me. Connecting with my whānau, which is, the Māori word for family. If I can have moments of connection with the people I love, I consider that to be success. Yeah. And walks in nature. It seems so trite to say these things. Yeah. And the irony is that the more I've tuned into that, the more successful I have been in my work life. It's ironic, isn't it?
I absolutely love that. We can go back to nature in a way, because I don't see a separation between us and nature. It's all one.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I just believe that so often when there is any form, I know myself and certainly with the leaders that I work with, nature has so many metaphors for whatever it is that we are experiencing. It has so much wisdom. And if we can often tune into that, let alone, if I go for a walk in nature, I'm very lucky. I live in Nelson. It's a beautiful part of New Zealand. And if I'm troubled or I'm stressed or angry or out of sorts, if I go for a walk in this beautiful river, 5 minutes from, my home, and I walk along the river, I feel better, right? Yeah.
Nature really inspires us to be more balanced. Balance, that's what comes to mind to me every time I look at nature, think about nature, balance and harmony. You mentioned just a few minutes earlier, power. Do you have a new understanding and idea of power these days?
Yes, I do. And it goes back to that first question that you asked me about what is leadership. And I think power happens between people when you are lifting others up. It is not an egocentric thing. The best sort of power, the power is the power in the room, or the power that you can ignite in others, or in the cause, or in the purpose of the team, or in others. And so it sort of circles back to that, I think.
So it's basically power is empowering.
I love that. I love that connection. That's it.
The idea of power that some people have, it's or societies even, it's a misleading thing. It's actually based on control and force, isn't it, Suzi? It's quite the opposite of love.
Absolutely. And I think people leaders especially can get caught up in the trappings of power. And I think one of the things that I really notice in working, particularly with senior executives, is that leaders often underestimate the shadow that they cast. When they whisper, it comes out as a shout. And so, true empowering, or, that I think when power is working well, it is when you are really mindful as a leader about the impact that you're having on others, and that you model what you want to see in others. That's powerful.
Talk to me about your book, Beyond Burnout, a New Zealand guide, how to spot it, stop it, and stamp it out. 2 initial questions for you, Suzi. How did you become a writer, and what was the inspiration and intention of writing your book?
Well, I had been a leadership coach for a short period of time, and a friend of mine said to me, "You should write a blog." And I said, "Oh, that sounds like a great idea. What's a blog?" And so I started. So I said, "I'm up for it. I'm very curious." And so I started writing this blog, many years ago, called The Leader's Digest, which I still write today. And I think that was a really good way to hone my writing skills and the discipline of writing, because every week I would have to produce a short piece. I had always wanted to write a book. I remember very early on, when I was in my 20s, sitting down one morning with my father, who was a professor of education, and I tentatively whispered to him, "One day I'd really like to write a book." And it really has only been in the last few years. I started writing this book 4 years ago. But in many ways, I think it's been inside me for some time. And the interesting thing about the Burnout book was that why did I choose this topic? I had, as a leadership coach and formerly as a senior executive coach, I had a front row seat to many leaders and senior executives who had experienced burnout. But the first time it came up close and personal was when I experienced it myself, although at the time I didn't recognize it as that. I was, from the outside, it looked like I had it all. My life was sort of awash with professional pinnacles and shiny badges of success. And every morning I had just come back to lead my team through the GFC, and I had a growing family of 3 children. My youngest daughter, I think she was just shy of 6 months. And every morning I'd jumble the kids into the car and, baby spittle on my suit and, hurl them off at their respective daycares and schools and move into town to do my job. And one morning I dropped my then 7-year-old son, Nicholas, off at school. And just as we pulled up outside the school, he turned to me, his voice trembling, and he said, "Mummy, can I please have a hug?" And I remember at the time looking past him and thinking about the presentation I had to give. And I replied in a clipped, stressed out tone, "No, I don't have time." And then I shoved him and his little backpack onto the pavement. And the look in his face and the rear vision mirror in his eyes will haunt me for the rest of my life. Needless to say, a few minutes later, I was on the side of the road in tears, because what I hadn't realised was that I was experiencing one of the main symptoms of burnout, which was depersonalisation and distancing. And it had crept up on me. And so later, I often look back at that moment and I thought if my boss and I had known the signs of burnout a bit more, it may have prevented that no-hug moment. And that was one of the reasons why I wrote the book. The other reason was really there are so many books about burnout targeting the individual. And this is a bit like treating the sick fish when it's the water that's contaminated. And so I wanted to bring a leadership lens to the conversation about burnout.
So what is burnout and what isn't? And how do we learn to recognize it, that it's not the same as stress or being stressed out? And also the misconceptions about burnout, Suzi.
Yeah, so burnout is a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion caused by excessive or prolonged stress, and it's related to your professional life. It's not everyday stress. Stress in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, we need a certain amount of stress to perform quite well. It's when it becomes prolonged, high-level workplace stress. It's when you feel exhausted, depleted, and unmotivated all most of the time, and it's a slow burn. One of the things I talk about 3 red flags or symptoms of burnout, and they are chronic exhaustion. So this is a bit like when your batteries won't recharge. You might go on holiday. But you come back just as exhausted, or you take a break and you come back exhausted. The second red flag is what I talked about earlier with my Nicholas no-hug moment. It's this creeping cynicism or depersonalization. And if you're in a caregiving or human services profession, that of course can have a really big ripple effect. And the third one, and this is reduced professional efficacy. So this sort of is when you feel like you're working as hard as you can, but you're not getting anywhere. Somebody I interviewed for the book said it's a bit like running a marathon in molasses. And I think that's a really good description and metaphor for it. So those are the 3 things to look out for in yourself and those that you lead.
So it's chronic. So that means every day, every moment. It's not something that it comes and goes, right, Suzi?
That's exactly right. I mean, I think we all have days when we find it hard to get out of bed and we think, I can't, or even periods of intense stress, and there may be a particular project, but it wanes. Yeah. When you have burnout, it's chronic and unremitting and unrelenting. It's this sense of exhaustion, just like you said, which it doesn't go away. It's when you don't have that bounce back factor and it continues, and that can be crippling. The thing that I think is really interesting about burnout, it's a slow burn. You don't wake up one morning feeling engaged and on fire, and the very next day feeling depleted and exhausted. It's a bit like a candle that burns down over time. And so I think one of the reasons why I wrote the book was that if we can get better, particularly leaders can get better at recognising the symptoms of burnout, those 3 red flags, we're going to be in a position to pick it up before it is too damaging, not only for the person experiencing it, but for the organisation, as well.
For some reason, I wanted to ask a question that might be related to it. Is perfectionism? Is that somehow related to burnout?
Well, what I found really interesting when I did the research for the book is that there are small factors or individual factors which may make you more likely to experience burnout, and type A and perfectionism is one of them. But these factors are minuscule in comparison to what I call environmental factors. So what the research is unequivocal about is that workplace and environmental and systemic factors play a much bigger role in causing burnout than individual factors do. And when we look at the 6 causes of burnout, they sit squarely in the occupational realm. So I think that if you have a type A personality and perfectionistic tendencies, there's a small amount of research that shows that you may have, more a slightly, higher chance of experiencing burnout. But one of the main things that I talk about in the book is that we need to place a lot more emphasis in the environment. It's that systemic and that holistic perspective. That's where the root causes of burnout lie.
In your book, you say burnout is not a new phenomenon, but it is a growing one. Why do you think it is growing at this time or has been?
Yeah, I think there are a variety of reasons, and I certainly think COVID has exacerbated some of the, our COVID world that we are living in has exacerbated some of the causes. One of the causes of burnout is isolation. And so when you say what's driving that, the research shows that it's really sad, but we are feeling more isolated and lonely than we ever had before. We may be able to connect, through technology and our smartphones, but I think that true connection, particularly at work, is, true deep connection is becoming harder to grasp. And so I think that is one of the cause. I think, we are living in a world that is, there's that VUCA acronym, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And I think that is, and also from work, I think that the what is also contributing to the growth of burnout is that we used to have a hard stop between our work life and our home life. And once again, technology, people getting emails at all times of night, this always on culture. And I think also there is a culture of overwork. I think we often, believe that work is inherently virtuous and rest is inherently lazy. And so I think there's this mental model that many of us hold, not only in organisations, but, in our society. So I think those are just some of the things that are contributing.
What is the balance? How do we actually learn to live a more balanced life? What would be the hours or the energy that we spend on work?
Yeah, it's, I love where you're going with that. Once again, because of my leadership lens and the power that organisations and leaders have, I think once again, it needs to be a balance between what leaders, the tone that they set in their environment, as well as our own. What's really interesting about that work, how much should we work? I was fascinated that the research shows us that anything over 50 hours a week and your productivity actually tanks. So you might be working 60 or 70 hours a week and the extra effort is really diminishing returns. That's just one sense. I think boundaries are really important, and from a very personal perspective, I've got this mantra where I will, if I start to tune into my body and I'm feeling, at the end of the day and I suddenly go, I'm really tired. There was a time where I would continue to plow on. Now I say to myself, this is enough. This is enough. And I will listen to my body. I will, take a break. I'll go for a rest. So those are just two things that I think. But I think, once again, organisational culture and leaders can set the tone about this.
Yeah, because we're so unique, all of us. But I absolutely love this idea of becoming more balanced and giving attention to everything, become more self-aware, really. That's where it is. Self-understanding and self-awareness. It has to come from that place.
It does. And you mentioned, I think this balance is the other thing I would say here is that when I work with leaders, the ones that actually are contributing the most and leading the best are the ones that do have those boundaries, that they, it's an overused metaphor, but I can see when it's used, we put our own oxygen mask on first. If you're depleted, exhausted and burnt out, you're not going to be able to lead well or contribute how you want to,
So we're almost at the end, and I do have some more questions for you. I have another question I want to ask you about. Yeah, the stages of burnout. You talk in the book, and you have lots of exercise. I love the wheel of life because the holistic component. I love that.
So I think, I talk about 4 strategies in the book: recognize, destigmatize, socialize, and organize. And these can be applied at, organizational leadership or individual levels. You mentioned the wheel of life, and I just want to talk about that because when I have worked with people who have experienced burnout or who may be a bit concerned about maybe they're moving into those stages of burnout. The Wheel of Life is a really good way of checking that. It's sort of almost measuring that, and you can Google the Wheel of Life. But that whole exercise, you plot your satisfaction on a wheel of all parts of your life. And often when people are experiencing burnout, the work one is out of whack. It's like a lumpy wheel. And so I think that is really important. And the thing about stages of burnout, quite often at first you can feel a bit hyper connected and hyper productivity. We don't have time to go into it. And then the final one is you've just got it's almost like you're numb. And so recognizing those different stages is, I think, important. And the Wheel of Life is a really good tool for that.
Yeah, I love also the 5 ways we can improve our emotional intelligence, because that's so important. I love the time management matrix too. That's another one.
Yes. Yeah, because I think, when we look at those strategies, it's really important to, there are some really useful tools that we can really apply for ourselves and those that we're leading. Even things like, one-on-ones. We have lots of what are we doing conversations, in our work, but I think it's really important to have how are we going conversations as well. I think, those moments to pause and reflect and connect and to check that out is really important.
So I have a few more questions for you, the ending questions. But before that, would you like to add anything or read a passage in your book?
Let me have a look. I guess my key message, if you had to boil down the book, is that, we need to stop putting too much onus on individuals for the detection and prevention of burnout. It has to be a conversation that involves leadership practices as well. We need to collectively come together and not put too much onus on the individuals in our workplace to solve burnout. I mean, burnout's not going to be solved by a fruit bowl in the lunchroom just on its own. We need to look at those leadership practices because that's where we can really make change when it comes to burnout.
Your work is not just for corporations or businesses, right?
No, it's, I think I wanted to make sure that it was, these, the things in the book, it can be applied at an individual level. So if you're experiencing burnout or you have a loved one, it's applicable there as well. So it's absolutely for individuals as well as for leaders.
So 2 more questions for you, the ending questions. If you knew you would die soon, meaning leaving the body, would you make any change or do anything in a different way?
Oh, wow. That is a great question. I didn't see that one coming. Do you know what? Right now in this moment, I can't think of anything I would be doing differently. Isn't that a lovely thing? It's a lovely reflection. And thank you so much for asking me that, because I think if you had asked me that a few years ago, I would have said something different. But right now I feel pretty good about how I'm living my life, actually, And my last question is, what are 3 things about life you know for sure as of this moment? That love in all its shapes and forms is where the magic lies. I would say that. That life is shorter than we think, and so don't put off that thing that you really have deep down inside of you that you really want to do or be. I would say that. And that my cat, who's 20, brings me joy. And my whānau, lots of joy. Back to nature, I know that he won't be on this life for much longer, but every day I'm astounded at how a 20-year-old cat can just bring joy to the world.
Yeah, that's a beautiful.
I would say that, but go. There's my third thing.
Yeah, in the moment. That's beautiful. I love your presence. Thank you so much, Suzi, for your authentic presence, your wisdom, your work, compassionate work. Thank you for everything. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. It's been so wonderful to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you. So before we say goodbye, where can we find more information about you, your books, products, services, and future projects?
Well, you can find me at suzimcalpine.com, and if you Google my website, it will show you everything. My book, Beyond Burnout, a New Zealand Guide, is available online in all the usual places. So there's a link on my website to my book as well. So there you go. That's where you can find me.
Wonderful. I'll have the link on your podcast profile too. Thank you so much again, Suzi, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
Thank you for listening. To learn more about Suzi McAlpine and her work, please visit SuziMcAlpine.com.
To learn more about this podcast, please visit fitforjoy.org/podcast. Thank you again for listening, and bye for now.